June 4, 1942, 5:30 a.m., the Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. Wind claws at the canvas edge of the flight deck as the great carrier Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi rolls gently in the swells. The rising sun spreads molten light across the steel sea, glinting off signal lamps, radio antennae, and rows of aircraft waiting with wings folded like resting predators. Engines cough and sputter in the chill dawn air. The smell of aviation fuel and hot oil drifts through the formation. You can hear the hum before you see the movement. Mechanics shout above the wind, tightening straps, checking bomb racks, pulling chocks from under wheels. Somewhere, a signal flag snaps violently. A whistle shrieks once sharp and final. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, Air Group leader and veteran of Pearl Harbor, stands near the island structure, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He does not fly today. A lingering illness keeps him grounded, but his presence carries weight. Around him, younger pilots adjust their leather helmets, grin at one another, exchange quiet jokes about the Americans. They speak with confidence. Dive bombing, some say, is a desperate tactic, dangerous, inefficient, too dependent on precision that few can master in real combat. Lieutenant Junior Grade Kenji Nakamura laughs openly as he straps into the cockpit of his Aichi-D, 3A Type 99 carrier bomber known to the Allies as the WWII. He taps the instrument panel with a gloved hand, as if reassuring himself of its reliability. "We will bomb the island," he says over the roar of warming engines. "Then return for breakfast. The Americans will still be searching for us." Behind him, deck crew signal with bright paddles. Propellers blur into spinning discs. The first aircraft lurches forward, gathering speed across the deck, wind screaming over its wings. It lifts into the golden sky, climbing toward the distant horizon where Midway Atoll lies hidden in morning haze. Far below, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands inside the operations room of Akagi, calm as stone. His staff officers cluster around plotting tables covered in charts marked with grease pencil. The radio crackles softly with coded transmissions. The air smells faintly of sweat and ink. Nagumo's plan is elegant. Strike Midway, destroy its airfields, draw out the American fleet, then annihilate it in a decisive carrier battle. Years of doctrine support this belief. Japanese naval aviation has dominated the Pacific since December. From Pearl Harbor to the Indian Ocean, every engagement has reinforced a simple truth. The enemy reacts slowly. The enemy misjudges. The enemy breaks. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi. Aboard the carrier, Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu voices mild concern through the radio circuit. He suggests readiness for unexpected contact. Nagumo listens, nods slightly, but says little. The morning is quiet. The sky is clear. Reconnaissance aircraft are already sweeping the ocean in expanding arcs. There is time. On the flight deck of Japanese aircraft carrier, Kaga sailors haul additional bombs from storage elevators. Heavy 800-kilogram armor-piercing weapons intended for ships. They lie secured on wooden dollies, waiting for orders that may never come. Nearby, torpedoes gleam in the growing light, their fins casting thin shadows across painted deck markings. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itiya, fighter group leader, watches his Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters climb into formation overhead. He feels the familiar surge of pride. These machines have ruled the skies from China to Hawaii. American aircraft burn easily. Their pilots lack discipline. Their ships scatter under pressure. He lights a cigarette, shielding the flame from the wind. Smoke curls upward and vanishes into the vastness above. Hours earlier, deep beneath the surface of the ocean, the American submarine USS Nautilus has struggled to maintain contact with the Japanese force. Mechanical failures and evasive maneuvers have kept her captain guessing. Reports reach Midway in fragments, nothing certain, nothing urgent. On Midway itself, radar operators peer at flickering screens inside cramped bunkers. Signals come and go. Weather interference, equipment limitations. The technology is new, unproven. Officers argue quietly over interpretation. But here on the Japanese carriers, uncertainty feels distant. The sea stretches empty in every direction. Only the steady rhythm of engines and the occasional cry of seabirds break the silence. At 6:10 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft approaches Midway. From high altitude, they see the coral atoll emerge from the ocean like a pale scar. Anti-aircraft fire blossoms in black puffs. Bombs fall. Runways erupt in fountains of sand and smoke. Fuel tanks ignite. Buildings splinter. Radio voices report success. Resistance is present but manageable. A second strike may be necessary to finish the job. Nagumo receives the message while sipping green tea from a porcelain cup. He studies the chart again. The American fleet has not appeared. Reconnaissance aircraft continue their search patterns. In hangar decks below, crews begin rearming reserve planes. Torpedoes are rolled aside. General-purpose bombs are hoisted into position. The process is methodical, practiced almost routine. Aviation gasoline hoses snake across the steel floor. Open fuel caps glisten like dark eyes. You can feel the calm spreading through the task force. It is the calm of men who believe history is unfolding according to their design. Lieutenant Nakamura's voice crackles over the radio as he turns back toward the carriers. Midway burning, he reports. Enemy air strength limited. Mission proceeding as expected. Around him, sunlight glints off the wings of dozens of returning aircraft. Their shadows skim across the endless water. At this moment, no one believes disaster is minutes away. The returning strike group circles above the task force in widening arcs, engines droning like distant thunder. Fuel gauges creep steadily downward. Pilots glance at their instruments, calculating endurance with disciplined calm. Below them, the carriers carve white wakes through a sea that still appears empty of danger. On the bridge of Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo receives a new signal from Midway. The message is concise, transmitted through bursts of radio static that distort every third word. The first attack has damaged installations but not eliminated resistance. Enemy aircraft remain operational. A second strike is recommended. Nagumo lowers the receiver slowly. Around him, officers exchange measured looks. The decision seems straightforward. Midway must be finished before the American fleet can intervene. Years of operational doctrine have drilled this lesson into every mind present. Land-based air power, even when weakened, is an unpredictable threat. Below-deck crews continue the labor of rearming. Torpedoes are pushed back toward storage racks. High-explosive bombs, better suited for airfields and buildings, are rolled forward on metal carts. The hangar smells strongly of gasoline and hot machinery. Mechanics wipe sweat from their brows with sleeves darkened by oil. You can hear the echo of shouted instructions bouncing off steel bulkheads. The rhythm of preparation feels confident, almost casual. Many sailors believe the most difficult phase of the operation has already passed. At 7 a.m., a reconnaissance seaplane launched earlier from the Japanese cruiser Tone finally transmits a delayed contact report. Lieutenant Junior Grade Joichi Tomonaga, still airborne after leading the Midway strike, hears fragments of the message relayed across the formation. Something about enemy ships, uncertain numbers, possible carriers. The transmission arrives incomplete. Static chews through vital details. Weather interference and distance distort the signal into a puzzle of half-truths. On the plotting table inside Akagi's operations room, staff officers lean over maps marked with compass bearings and estimated positions. Commander Minoru, Genda, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, studies the information with narrowed eyes. He senses that the morning's calm is beginning to fracture. He advises caution. Aircraft still require refueling. Ordnance is scattered across hangar decks in transitional states. Launching a coordinated strike against unknown enemy forces will take time. Yet waiting too long risks allowing American carriers to strike first. Nagumo listens, hands clasped behind his back. He asks for confirmation. None arrives. Above the fleet, the sky brightens into a hard blue dome. Heat shimmers on the horizon. The sea reflects sunlight in blinding flashes that make distant shapes difficult to distinguish. Visibility is excellent in theory, but deceptive in practice. On the flight deck of Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura finally receives landing signals. His dive bomber descends with controlled precision. Wheels slam against the deck. Arrestor wires snap taut. He exhales sharply as the aircraft jolts to a halt. Deck crews rush forward, guiding him toward elevator platforms. Refueling hoses are already uncoiled. Bomb racks hang open like waiting jaws. Nakamura climbs from the cockpit, stretching stiff limbs. He laughs with a mechanic who asks about the raid. They speak of anti-aircraft bursts and burning hangars. They do not speak of American carriers. Far to the northeast, on the bridge of the carrier USS Enterprise, Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance stands beside Captain George Murray. Their task force cuts through rising swells at flank speed. Radar operators report intermittent contacts. American dive bomber squadrons are already climbing toward the TAC altitude, guided by fragmentary intelligence and sheer determination. But here within Nagumo's formation, uncertainty still feels manageable. The Tone Scout plane continues its search pattern. Its pilot struggles with radio equipment that functions only intermittently. Minutes pass, then more minutes. At 7:28 a.m., a second transmission arrives. This time the words are clearer. Enemy surface units confirmed. Course and speed unknown. Possible carrier presence. The operations room grows noticeably quieter. Officers stop writing. Pens hover above paper. A sense of suspended motion settles over the space. Nagumo faces a dilemma shaped by timing. Reserve aircraft are half-armed with bombs intended for Midway. Torpedoes remain stacked nearby, ready but not yet reattached. Refueling operations have begun. Hangar decks are cluttered with lethal cargo and exposed fuel lines. To reverse the process now will require precious minutes. To continue risks facing American ships with inadequate weaponry, Commander Genda suggests launching a partial strike immediately. Others argue for completing the rearming cycle. The discussion remains calm, almost clinical, but tension seeps into every word. Outside, Zero fighters maintain their combat air patrol overhead. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya leads them in disciplined orbits. The sky still appears empty of enemy aircraft. His confidence remains unshaken. "You can hear only our engines," he remarks to his wingmen. The Americans are blind. At that moment, far beyond visual range, American torpedo squadrons from USS Hornet and USS Enterprise struggle through heavy cloud layers and navigational confusion. Many are already off course. Fuel consumption becomes a silent adversary. Back on Akagi, Nagumo finally issues a revised order. Rearm reserve aircraft with torpedoes once more. Prepare for a possible fleet engagement. The command travels through the carrier in waves of shouted repetition. Bombs are rolled aside again. Torpedoes are dragged forward. Fuel hoses are disconnected and reconnected. The hangar transforms into a maze of shifting priorities. Sailors move quickly but methodically, trusting procedure to guide them through complexity. Time slips away. At 8:20 a.m., the Tone Scout plane sends another update. Enemy force includes what appears to be a carrier. Exact number still uncertain. Now the calm begins to crack in earnest. Yet even in this moment, many still believe the situation can be controlled. Japanese doctrine emphasizes decisive initiative, superior training, coordinated strikes. The morning's confusion feels temporary, a minor disruption in an otherwise flawless operation. You can sense the weight of assumption pressing down on every decision. Above the fleet, the first distant shapes of incoming American aircraft begin to form against the glare of the sun, still unnoticed by most eyes scanning the horizon. The first warning does not come from radar or reconnaissance reports. It comes from the sudden change in the sound of engines overhead. At 9:18 a.m., high above the Japanese carrier formation, Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya banks his Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighter sharply to port. His headset fills with overlapping voices. Excited, confused, urgent. A formation of unfamiliar aircraft is approaching at low altitude, skimming the waves like shadows torn loose from the sea. From the bridge of Japanese aircraft carrier, Akagi signalmen squint into the dazzling sunlight. The horizon flickers with movement. For a moment, the shapes are mistaken for returning scouts. Then the realization spreads like an electric shock. Enemy. Torpedo bombers. They are slow. They are exposed. They are flying without fighter escort. On the flight deck, mechanics freeze mid-step. Fuel hoses lie coiled like sleeping snakes across steel plates. Bomb carts stand unattended. The calm routine of rearming operations dissolves into sudden urgency. Nagamo steps out onto the bridge wing. Wind whips at his uniform. He watches the distant specks grow larger, resolving into stub-winged Douglas TB-D Devastator aircraft from USS Hornet. Their engines strain audibly even at this range. Their formation is uneven, scattered by navigation errors and fuel concerns. Launch fighters, he orders quietly. Itaya's Zeros dive from their patrol altitude with predatory speed. Sunlight flashes along polished wings as they roll into firing position. Machine guns chatter. Tracer rounds streak downward in bright arcs. You can almost feel the violence of the interception. The torpedo bombers lumber forward despite the attack. Their pilots cling to course headings memorized in briefing rooms hours earlier. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron leads Torpedo Squadron 8 with unwavering determination. He knows the risk. He knows the aircraft he flies is outdated and underprotected. Yet he holds formation as long as formation exists. Explosions blossom across the sky. One Devastator erupts into flame and spirals toward the ocean. Another limps forward, trailing black smoke. Radio transmissions fragment into desperate pleas and clipped acknowledgments. From the deck of Japanese aircraft carrier, Kaga sailors watch the battle unfold with a mix of relief and disbelief. The American attack appears disorganized, predictable, almost futile. Anti-aircraft guns thunder in disciplined bursts, filling the air with shrapnel clouds that glitter in the sun. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura stands beside his dive bomber helmet hanging loosely in his hand. He studies the incoming aircraft with narrowed eyes. They are too low, he remarks to a fellow pilot. They will never reach torpedo range. Above them, Itaya's fighters carve through the American formation. One by one, Devastators fall. The sea below becomes a graveyard of floating debris and spreading fuel slicks. Yet the attack has consequences that no one fully grasps in the moment. To intercept the low-flying torpedo planes, Japanese fighters descend far below their normal patrol altitude. Their attention narrows to the immediate threat. Their fuel gauges tick downward. The sky above the fleet grows increasingly unguarded. Inside Akagi's hangar decks, the situation grows more precarious with each passing minute. Aircraft stand fueled and armed in varying configurations. Torpedoes rest unsecured near stacks of bombs. Open gasoline containers line the walls. Sailors continue shifting ordnance in response to rapidly changing orders. Commander Minoru Genda senses the danger in this chaos. He urges acceleration of strike preparation. The American carriers must be located and attacked without delay. But precise intelligence remains elusive. Reconnaissance reports arrive late, distorted, or incomplete. At 9:25 a.m., a second wave of American torpedo bombers appears, this time from USS Enterprise. They approach from a different bearing, forcing Japanese fighters to climb, dive, and reposition in exhausting cycles. The sky becomes a battlefield of intersecting trajectories. Machine gun fire echoes like tearing fabric. Pilots shout coordinates over clogged radio frequencies. Some messages never reach their intended recipients. You can hear the tension building in every engine note, in every hurried footstep on steel decks below. On the bridge of Japanese aircraft carrier, Hiryu Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi studies the unfolding engagement with growing unease. The American attacks are ineffective in isolation, but their persistence is unsettling. They arrive not as a coordinated strike, but as a series of probing blows. Each one forces Japanese defenses to react. Each one consumes time. Meanwhile, far above the scattered dogfights and flak bursts, a formation of American Douglas, SPD, Dauntless dive bombers struggles through broken cloud layers. Led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, they search for the enemy fleet with dwindling fuel reserves and fading hope. At this moment, no one below is aware of their presence. Back near sea level, the surviving Devastators press forward. Lieutenant George Gay's aircraft shudders violently as bullets tear through its fuselage. He holds course until the last possible second, releasing his torpedo into churning water just before his plane is struck again. The torpedo misses. Nearly all do. Japanese sailors cheer as the final American torpedo bombers are destroyed or driven off. Smoke trails dissipate into the clear morning sky. Anti-aircraft crews reload methodically. Deck officers signal for continued rearming operations. Relief spreads through the task force. The unexpected attack has been repelled. Losses are minimal. Confidence begins to reassert itself. Yet overhead, the protective umbrella of fighter patrol remains dangerously thin. Far above, hidden in the glare of the sun, the next threat is already descending. At 10:18 a.m., the Pacific sky appears almost peaceful again. Smoke from destroyed American torpedo bombers thins into faint gray streaks drifting eastward. The ocean settles back into its slow rhythm. On the flight decks of Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi and Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga, deck crews resume their complex choreography. Fuel hoses are dragged into place. Bomb carts rattle across steel plating. Aircraft elevators rise and fall with mechanical groans. It feels as if the crisis has passed. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura wipes sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. He has watched American torpedo squadrons torn apart in the sky. Their attacks were brave, he admits silently, but tactically flawed. He believes the decisive Japanese strike against enemy carriers will soon begin. He imagines diving from altitude, releasing his bomb with mathematical precision and returning to a triumphant fleet. In the operations room below, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands rigidly before the plotting table. Updated reconnaissance reports now confirm multiple American carriers somewhere to the northeast. The information arrives too late to simplify his choices. Aircraft aboard his ships are still being rearranged. Torpedoes lie beside bombs. Fuel lines remain connected. Launch sequences have been interrupted repeatedly. Commander Minoru Genda speaks in a low, controlled voice. The next strike must be launched immediately once rearming is complete. Every minute increases the likelihood of American counterattack. The entire logic of carrier warfare depends on striking first. Nagumo nods but hesitates. His formation has just repelled several attacks. Fighters are low on fuel. Deck crews are exhausted. He wants clarity. He wants certainty. Outside, the weather offers no comfort. Sunlight reflects fiercely off the sea, creating mirages that distort distance and altitude. Heat shimmers above steel decks. The air smells strongly of gasoline vapor drifting upward from open fuel tanks and freshly serviced aircraft. You can hear the sound of tools clattering in hurried hands. Voices raised slightly louder than necessary. The subtle change in tone that signals tension spreading through disciplined ranks. At 10:20 a.m., Japanese combat air patrol fighters begin climbing back toward their assigned altitudes. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya leads the maneuver, aware that his aircraft are dangerously low on fuel. Several Zeros peel away to land. Others continue circling, scanning the vast blue dome above. Their attention remains focused on the horizon. They do not look directly into the sun. High above the fleet, almost invisible against the glare, American dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown have finally located their targets. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey has followed a lone Japanese destroyer, cutting through the waves at high speed. Its wake has led him straight to the carriers. Now his squadron spread into attack formation. You can feel the sudden shift in atmosphere even before the first bomb falls. The distant whine of descending aircraft grows louder, sharper, like metal tearing through the sky. On the bridge of Akagi, signalmen shout and point upward. A lookout's voice cracks with urgency. Enemy dive bombers overhead. Nagumo steps forward, instinctively, eyes searching the brilliant sky. For a fraction of a second, he sees nothing. Then the shapes appear. Small at first, then multiplying, then plunging toward the fleet in steep, terrifying arcs. Anti-aircraft guns open fire in explosive bursts. Shell casings cascade across decks like falling rain. Sailors scramble for cover. Mechanics abandon fuel lines. Bomb carts stand frozen in place as if time itself has hesitated. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura turns upward just as the first American Douglas SBD Dauntless aircraft screams past at near vertical angle. Its dive brakes howl in the rushing air. The pilot remains locked on his target, ignoring flak bursts that blossom around him. You can hear the rising pitch of engines pushed to their limits, the vibration in the steel deck beneath your feet, the sudden realization that the morning's assumptions are dissolving into chaos. On cargo rows of aircraft sit fully fueled and armed wings spread in preparation for launch. The hangar deck below is crowded with additional planes in similar condition. A single well-placed bomb could ignite a chain reaction beyond control. At 10:22 a.m., the first explosion erupts. A bomb strikes cargo near the aft elevator, tearing through the flight deck and detonating among fueled aircraft below. Fire blooms instantly, fed by gasoline fumes and stacked ordnance. Flames surge upward in violent orange waves. Seconds later, more bombs follow. On Akagi, one American dive bomber releases its payload from a perfect angle. The bomb punches through the wooden flight deck near the center line. It detonates deep inside the hangar, where torpedoes and fuel hoses lie scattered in lethal proximity. The carrier shudders violently. A pillar of black smoke punches into the sky. You can hear screams now, orders shouted in desperate tones. Fire alarms clanging uselessly against the roar of spreading infernos. Fighter patrol. Zeros dive frantically toward the attackers, but they are seconds too late. The American formation has already begun pulling out of its dives, climbing away through curtains of flak. On the bridge of Hiryu, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi watches the catastrophe unfold with cold clarity. 2 carriers are already burning. Damage reports flood in over radio circuits clogged with static and panic. The original plan, carefully constructed and confidently executed, is unraveling in real time. Yet even now, some officers believe the situation can be contained. Fires can be fought. Aircraft can still be launched from surviving decks. Counterstrike remains possible. You can sense the human instinct to deny disaster, even as the sky fills with smoke and falling debris. The escalation has begun. The misjudgment has been revealed. At 10:25 a.m., the sea around the Japanese carrier formation is no longer calm. Black columns of smoke claw upward from the shattered decks of Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga and Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi. Fire spreads with terrifying speed through hangars packed with fueled aircraft and exposed ordnance. The explosions are not singular events. They are rolling detonations that echo through steel corridors and buckled bulkheads. On Akagi, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo braces himself against the bridge rail as another blast shakes the ship. The deck tilts slightly, then steadies. His staff officers shout damage reports over the constant ringing of alarm bells. Electrical systems flicker. Ventilation fans grind to a halt. Smoke pours upward through elevator shafts like a living thing. You can smell burning fuel even from the open air of the bridge wing. Acrid and suffocating. The wind carries sparks across the deck, igniting loose canvas covers and signal flags. Below, chaos unfolds in tightening circles. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura finds himself running without clear direction. One moment he stands beside his dive bomber, the next he is pushing through a wall of heat that sears his lungs. Sailors drag fire hoses toward spreading flames. Others attempt to roll live bombs toward deck edges in desperate efforts to prevent secondary explosions. The hoses sputter weak streams of water that vanish into roaring infernos. Somewhere in the confusion, a torpedo detonates prematurely. The blast throws men across the hangar floor like discarded tools. Steel beams groan. Aircraft fuselages crumple inward as if crushed by invisible hands. Yet on the surface of command discipline tries to hold. Nagumo receives fragmented updates from other ships. Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu has also been hit. Fires are spreading uncontrollably. Damage control parties are losing ground. Ammunition lockers threaten to ignite. The scale of the disaster is still difficult to accept. Commander Minoru Genda presses forward with urgent insistence. Surviving aircraft must be launched at once. A counterattack is the only path to restoring initiative. He points toward the unstricken carrier Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu, which still maneuvers at high speed several miles away. Its decks intact, its air group largely operational. For a fleeting moment, hope concentrates around that single ship. On Hiryu's bridge, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi has already begun issuing orders. Pilots race toward their aircraft. Ground crews move with renewed intensity, hauling bombs into position, refueling tanks with shaking hands. The deck vibrates under the rising thunder of engines preparing for takeoff. You can feel the urgency in every motion, every shouted command, every glance skyward searching for returning enemy planes. At 10:28 a.m., another American dive bomber plunges towards Soryu. The bomb it releases tears through the flight deck and detonates among parked aircraft below. A blossom of flame erupts so violently that observers aboard neighboring ships feel the shock wave in their chests. Within minutes, 3 of the 4 great carriers that form the core of the First Air Fleet are ablaze. Still, official language avoids the word catastrophe. Damage reports speak of localized fires, temporary loss of operational capability, efforts underway to restore control. The vocabulary of naval professionalism becomes a shield against reality. Onakagi Nagumo finally gives the order to abandon the bridge and relocate to a destroyer. The decision carries enormous symbolic weight. It acknowledges that command of the fleet can no longer be exercised from the flagship itself. You can sense the reluctance in every step he takes away from the burning carrier. As he descends into the smoke-filled interior, the soundscape changes. The roar of fire becomes louder. The screams of injured sailors more distinct. The metallic crash of collapsing structures echoes like distant artillery. Lieutenant Nakamura joins a line of men passing buckets of seawater hand to hand. The effort feels futile, yet stopping would mean surrendering entirely. He glances once toward the sky and sees Hiryu's aircraft launching in tight formation, climbing toward the sun. Their departure carries both promise and desperation. At 10:35 a.m., Hiryu's first strike group forms up under Lieutenant Yoichi Tomonaga. Their target is the American carrier believed to be operating nearby. Radios crackle with coordinates hastily calculated from incomplete reconnaissance data. The pilots know what they are flying into. They have seen the smoke columns marking the fate of their sister ships. Yet training and loyalty drive them forward. Back among the burning carriers, the turning point deepens. Explosions continue to ripple through Kaga's hangar decks. Flames reach the bridge level. Ammunition detonates in staccato bursts. Lifeboats are lowered into waters already littered with debris and oil slicks. Still, many officers cling to the belief that the battle can be reversed. If Hiryu's strike succeeds, if American carriers can be crippled, if fires aboard the damaged ships can somehow be contained, you can feel the weight of denial pressing against the crushing evidence of loss. The moment no one wanted to admit has already arrived. Yet its full meaning remains just beyond conscious acceptance. At 11 a.m., the sky above the shattered Japanese formation is stained with smoke and drifting embers. The once ordered geometry of carrier operations has dissolved into fragments of motion and sound. Destroyers weave through oil-slicked water, their decks crowded with survivors pulled from the burning hulks of Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga and Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu. The sea itself seems wounded, reflecting twisted shapes of flame and metal. On the crippled flagship Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo pauses briefly near the hangar entrance. Heat radiates outward like a physical force. Smoke claws at his throat. Sailors stagger past him carrying injured comrades, their uniforms' blackened faces streaked with soot and fear. You can hear the sound of ammunition cooking off in distant compartments. Each detonation echoes like a hammer blow against the illusion of control. Nagumo descends toward the waiting destroyer, Japanese destroyer Nowaki. The transfer is awkward and silent. Officers assist him across the gap as the burning carrier lists slightly in the swell. Behind him, the symbol of Japanese naval power continues to burn, its fate increasingly certain. Yet the battle is not finished. Several miles away, the carrier Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu cuts through the water at full speed. Its decks remain intact. Its command structure functions. Its air group is already in motion. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stands rigid on the bridge binoculars, fixed on the horizon as radio updates arrive in rapid bursts. Lieutenant Shuichi Tomonaga's strike group approaches the American carrier USS Yorktown. Anti-aircraft fire rises to meet them in thick black clouds. The sea churns under the shock of near misses. Dive bombers from Hiryu push through the defensive barrage with grim determination. You can feel the shift in emotional tone. Confidence has vanished. What remains is urgency sharpened by shock. At 11:20 a.m., bombs fall toward Yorktown's flight deck. One detonates near the forward elevator. Another explodes along the starboard side. Smoke erupts. Fires spread. American sailors race to contain the damage as water floods compromised compartments. Reports of success reach Hiryu's bridge moments later. Yamaguchi allows himself a brief nod. The battle, he believes, may yet balance on the edge of recovery. But confusion multiplies faster than clarity. Back among the damaged Japanese carriers, rescue operations compete with fears of further air attack. Lookouts scan the sky constantly. Anti-aircraft crews remain at their stations despite exhaustion and dehydration. The smell of burning paint and fuel clings to every breath. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura now finds himself aboard a destroyer after abandoning Kaga. He sits against a bulkhead helmet resting on his knees, staring toward the horizon where Hiryu's aircraft have vanished into bright haze. His thoughts circle one question he cannot answer. How did the morning unravel so quickly? On the destroyer's bridge, junior officers argue quietly over signals received from fleet headquarters. Orders seem contradictory. Some ships are instructed to withdraw westward. Others are told to maintain screening positions. The original operational plan has fractured into improvised reactions. You can hear radio static dominating every conversation. Messages overlap. Coordinates blur. Decision-making becomes a race against incomplete information. At 12 noon, Hiryu launches a second strike. This time, torpedo bombers take the lead. Their objective remains Yorktown, which reconnaissance suggests is still afloat despite earlier hits. Engines roar across the flight deck as aircraft lift into a sky now hazed by smoke, drifting from miles away. Yamaguchi's voice carries firm resolve as he addresses his staff. The enemy must be finished. The survival of the entire operation may depend on this final effort. Far below, the ocean reflects scattered sunlight like broken glass. The second attack group approaches Yorktown shortly after 12:30 p.m. American fighter cover has thinned. Damage control teams struggle to restore power and steering. The carrier appears wounded yet defiant. Japanese torpedo bombers descend toward the surface, skimming waves under heavy fire. White wakes streak behind, release torpedoes. Seconds stretch into eternity as they race toward their target. Two impacts follow in rapid succession. Water erupts along Yorktown's hull. The ship shudders violently. Steam and smoke billow upward in thick columns. Reports of these hits reach Hiryu with renewed hope. Some officers begin to believe the tide has turned again. Perhaps 3 Japanese carriers have been lost, but the destruction of American flat tops could still secure strategic victory. Yet even as this belief forms new danger, approaches unseen. High above the Pacific, American dive bomber squadrons regroup in search. Their fuel reserves shrink. Their pilots scan the endless blue for any sign of the last surviving Japanese carrier. Back on Hiryu deck, crews prepare for recovery of returning aircraft. The cycle of launch and land continues despite mounting fatigue. Every man understands that the margin for error has vanished. You can feel desperation taking root beneath outward discipline. Shock has given way to frantic calculation. Confusion breeds decisions made faster than they can be evaluated. The battle's center of gravity now rests on a single ship racing across a sunlit ocean, and the sky remains full of unseen threats. At 2:30 p.m., the afternoon sun hangs high above the Pacific, turning the sea into a sheet of blinding silver. The carrier, Japanese aircraft carrier, Hiryu, moves at full speed, its bow slicing through long, rolling swells. The deck vibrates continuously under the weight of engines warming for potential launch. Smoke from the distant wreckage of sister ships still stains the horizon, a grim reminder of how swiftly fortune has shifted. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stands near the bridge windows, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Around him, officers speak in clipped tones, their confidence now sharpened into something closer to resolve. Hiryu is the last operational strike platform of the once dominant First Air Fleet. Every calculation now centers on what this single ship can still achieve. You can hear the rhythmic pulse of the engines through the steel floor. You can sense the strain behind each calm command. Reports from returning air crews suggest that the American carrier USS Yorktown has been heavily damaged. Smoke was seen rising. Torpedo impacts confirmed. Some believe she may sink before nightfall. The idea offers a fragile thread of optimism. If one American carrier is neutralized, the balance might still be contested. Yet intelligence remains incomplete. No one aboard Hiryu knows that Yorktown's damage control teams are already fighting back with relentless efficiency. Pumps roar. Repair crews seal ruptured compartments. Aircraft handlers clear the deck with disciplined speed. Back among the drifting Japanese escorts, destroyers continue rescue operations. Survivors cling to floating debris from Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga and Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu. The smell of burned aviation fuel lingers heavily on the water. Some sailors sit in stunned silence after being pulled aboard. Others ask questions that no one can answer. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura watches from the rail of a screening destroyer. His dive bomber lies at the bottom of the ocean along with the carrier that once felt invincible. The operational plan drilled into him during months of training has simply ceased to exist. You can feel the psychological collapse beginning to spread. Not panic, not yet, but a growing awareness that familiar certainties have vanished. At 3 p.m., lookouts aboard Hiryu report distant aircraft high to the east. The shapes are small, almost indistinguishable from drifting clouds. Combat air patrol fighters scramble to intercept. Mitsubishi, a 6M0 engines scream as they climb into thinning air, their pilots straining to locate the approaching threat. Radar does not guide them. Visual detection remains the only defense. On Hiryu's flight deck, ground crews begin moving additional bombs toward waiting aircraft. Another strike may still be necessary. Yamaguchi refuses to concede initiative. His belief in aggressive action has defined his career. It defines this moment as well. But time has become an enemy. At 3:45 p.m., American dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown finally sight Hiryu. Lieutenant Commander Earl Gallagher leads part of the formation. Sunlight glints off wings as pilots push into steep attack angles. You can hear the change in sound even before impact. The rising howl of dive brakes. The thudding rhythm of anti-aircraft guns firing at maximum elevation. Sailors on deck scatter toward cover as shadows streak downward across painted markings. The first bomb strikes near the forward elevator. The explosion tears open the flight deck and sends fragments spinning into the air like shrapnel from a shattered shield. A second bomb follows seconds later, detonating among fueled aircraft preparing for launch. Flames surge instantly. Thick black smoke coils upward in violent spirals. Yamaguchi grips the bridge rail as the carrier shudders beneath him. Reports flood in. Fires out of control, steering compromised, hangar decks engulfed. The final operational pillar of the original plan is collapsing in front of his eyes, yet discipline persists even in catastrophe. Damage control teams rush forward with hoses and extinguishers. Pilots trapped below decks attempt to reach ladders through choking smoke. Ammunition cooks off in sharp metallic bursts that echo across the sea. From the destroyers nearby, sailors watch the inferno consume Hiryu's elegant silhouette. Some cannot believe what they are seeing. Only hours earlier, this formation represented the most powerful naval aviation force in the world. Now it burns. Lieutenant Nakamura lowers his gaze as another explosion rocks the stricken carrier. He realizes that there will be no coordinated counterstrike. No decisive victory, only scattered survival. You can sense the irreversible collapse of strategic intent. The original plan was built on speed, surprise, and overwhelming concentration of force. All three have been shattered in a single afternoon. By 4:30 p.m., flames dominate Hiryu's decks. Communication lines fail one after another. Officers shout orders that vanish into the roar of fire and the constant thunder of secondary blasts. The sky above the Pacific begins to soften toward evening hues, but the battle's violence shows no sign of easing. The structure that guided every movement of the Japanese fleet has fallen apart. What remains is instinct endurance and the struggle to stay afloat amid drifting wreckage. By 5:15 p.m., the Pacific wind carries a strange stillness between bursts of violence. The carrier. Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu is now a wounded giant, drifting through smoke and fading sunlight. Flames ripple along the flight deck in jagged lines. Explosions erupt at irregular intervals deep within her hangar spaces. Each blast sends shockwaves through nearby escort ships, reminders that the struggle for control has not yet ended. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi remains on the bridge despite urgent pleas from his staff. His uniform is streaked with soot, his binoculars hang unused at his side. He studies the burning decks with an expression that reveals neither panic nor hope, only concentration. You can hear the creak of metal expanding under intense heat, the groan of bulkheads buckling, the distant splash of debris falling into the sea. Around, Hiryu destroyers maneuver cautiously, searching for survivors thrown overboard by the blasts. The water is thick with floating wreckage, fragments of aircraft wings, charred planks from shattered flight decks, life jackets drifting in slow circles. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura stands among a group of rescued aviators aboard a screening vessel. Their faces are hollow with exhaustion. Some speak in whispers about returning to fight. Others stare silently at the burning horizon as if still trying to understand the speed of the disaster. Messages from Fleet Command continue to arrive, each one more uncertain than the last. Orders to regroup. Orders to withdraw, instructions that contradict earlier directives. The clarity of the morning has dissolved into a maze of improvisation, yet attempts to recover initiative persist. At 6 p.m., Yamaguchi authorizes renewed efforts to launch any aircraft still capable of flight. Mechanics and pilots move through smoke-filled corridors toward the forward portion of the deck where flames have momentarily receded. The idea is desperate but logical. Even a small strike might disrupt American pursuit. Even symbolic resistance could restore morale. You can feel the determination in every strained movement, every cough stifled behind a gloved hand, every step taken across scorched steel. But reality intervenes with brutal consistency. Fuel lines have ruptured across multiple compartments. Ammunition magazines are compromised. Electrical systems fail unpredictably. The elevators that once lifted aircraft with mechanical precision now hang twisted and immobile. On the bridge, Yamaguchi receives confirmation that 3 sister carriers are already lost beyond hope of salvage. Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga and Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu have been abandoned by most of their crews. Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi burns with uncontrollable intensity. The realization tightens around him like a closing fist. Still, he delays evacuation. On nearby destroyers, captains watch the situation with growing urgency. Night approaches. The threat of further American air attack lingers. Remaining surface ships must decide whether to remain close enough to assist or withdraw to preserve their own fighting strength. You can hear heated discussions over radio circuits clogged with static and fading signals. Some officers argue that saving the fleet's command staff is essential. Others insist that abandoning Hiryu prematurely would symbolize defeat. At 6:45 p.m., another internal explosion rocks the carrier. Flames burst through sections of the flight deck that had seemed temporarily secure. Pilots attempting to prepare a final launch are forced back by waves of heat that scorch exposed skin. Lieutenant Nakamura watches from a distance as the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon. The burning carrier becomes a silhouette framed by orange light and rising smoke. The scene feels unreal, as if witnessed through a haze of disbelief. He remembers the morning's laughter, the confidence that Midway would fall quickly, the assumption that dive bombing was merely one tactic among many, not the force that would redefine the battle itself. Now the sky glows red above the wreckage. At 7:30 p.m., Yamaguchi finally consents to evacuation orders. Small boats move alongside the listing hull. Officers and sailors climb down rope ladders into pitching waves. Some slip, some hesitate. Others salute the ship before stepping away. You can sense the emotional weight of departure. This carrier was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of national ambition, technological mastery, and years of disciplined training. Attempts to recover what was already lost continue in quieter forms. Damage control teams fight isolated fires long after the broader struggle has ended. Signal lamps flash messages to distant ships that may no longer be within range. As darkness approaches, the sea absorbs the last reflections of daylight. Smoke drifts low across the water. Stars begin to appear above the battlefield. Yet the consequences of the afternoon remain unresolved. June 4th, 1942, 10:45 p.m., the Pacific Ocean, west of Midway. Night settles slowly over the drifting remnants of what had once been the most formidable carrier strike force on Earth. The sea is black glass, now broken only by the orange glow of distant fires, and the white wake of destroyers moving cautiously through wreckage. The shattered hull of Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu still burns against the darkness. Flames no longer leap as violently as before. Instead, they crawl across twisted metal and collapsed decking in long, restless tongues of light. Smoke hangs low, pressed downward by cooling air. Every gust of wind carries sparks that vanish into the night like dying stars. On the destroyer. Japanese destroyer, Kazagumo. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura sits on the cold deck, plating with his back against a bulkhead. His helmet lies beside him. His hands are blackened with soot and dried salt water. Around him, survivors speak in hushed voices, or not at all. You can hear the quiet now. No engines roaring overhead, no dive brakes screaming through the sky. Only the distant crackle of burning steel and the steady rhythm of waves striking the hull. Hours earlier, every man here believed he understood the battle. They had trained for years to master carrier warfare. They had studied timing, formation, fuel consumption, attack angles, recovery cycles. They believed victory would follow discipline as naturally as sunrise follows night. Now they stare at the dark horizon and feel certainty slipping away. At 11 p.m., signals from Fleet Command finally clarify the scale of loss. Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi remains uncontrollable and will likely be scuttled before dawn. Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga and Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu have already been abandoned, their fires too intense for rescue efforts to continue. Hiryu, the last hope of restoring offensive power, drifts toward the same fate. The realization spreads through the surviving crews with painful precision. You can almost feel the moment when denial gives way to comprehension. It does not come as a single shock. It arrives gradually like cold water seeping through cracked armor. On Kazagumo's bridge, junior officers study updated charts under dim red lamps. The original operational plan is no longer discussed. Instead, they plot withdrawal routes, fuel reserves, and rendezvous points for scattered escorts. Tactical language has shifted from attack to survival. Radio circuits carry fragments of conversation between ships that once moved in perfect coordination. Now, they sound like strangers searching for one another in the dark. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi has chosen to remain aboard Hiryu. His decision becomes known slowly among the survivors. Some interpret it as an act of loyalty, others as a final refusal to accept the battle's outcome. His voice is heard one last time over a fading transmitter, calm and formal, acknowledging the ship's condition and expressing confidence in the fleet's future. Then the signal ends. Lieutenant Nakamura closes his eyes briefly when he hears the report. He remembers watching Hiryu's aircraft launch hours earlier, their wings flashing in bright sunlight. He remembers believing that those planes would reverse everything. Now he understands that the battle has already been decided. At midnight, American search planes circle cautiously at high altitude, observing the burning silhouettes from beyond the range of Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Their engines sound distant and almost indifferent. The sky that once carried violent motion now feels vast and empty. On the water, rescue operations continue in slow, methodical patterns. Sailors pull exhausted comrades from floating debris fields. Some survivors whisper about returning to base and preparing for the next engagement. Others simply stare at the dark outline of the ocean, trying to measure the weight of what has been lost. You can sense how strategic awareness filters down through individual experience. The destruction of 4 carriers is not just a tactical setback. It represents the sudden collapse of a belief that had guided every decision since the war began. Dive bombing had been regarded by some as unreliable, too dependent on timing, too exposed to defensive fire. Yet, in a single afternoon, precise attacks from high altitude had shattered the concentrated strength of an entire fleet. At 12:30 a.m., orders are issued to prepare scuttling charges aboard the wrecked carriers still afloat. The explosions will ensure that the ships do not fall into enemy hands. The act carries a heavy symbolism. It acknowledges that recovery is no longer possible. Lieutenant Nakamura rises slowly to his feet and walks toward the rail. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction. Above him, the stars burn with cold clarity. Somewhere beyond that darkness, American carriers continue moving their decks intact, their aircraft refueled and ready. He realizes that the balance of power has shifted beyond immediate repair. The moment of realization settles like night itself. Quiet, absolute, unavoidable. June 5th, 1942, 4:10 a.m. The Pacific Ocean, west of Midway. A pale gray light begins to rise along the eastern horizon. The sea is calm again, as if the violence of the previous day had been only a fever dream. Low swells roll gently beneath scattered destroyers that now form the broken remains of a once coordinated fleet. Smoke still lingers in the air, but the towering columns of flame have faded into drifting shadows. Where the proud hull of Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi had stood there is now only a blackened shape, barely visible above the waterline. A demolition team moves silently along her tilted deck. You can hear the metallic click of detonators being armed. The quiet murmur of orders passed from one exhausted sailor to another. There is no urgency now, only inevitability. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura watches from the rail of the destroyer, Japanese destroyer Arashi, as dawn gathers strength. His eyes follow the small boats pulling away from the dying carrier. The men aboard them do not speak. They row with mechanical precision, their movements drained of emotion. Moments later, a deep explosion rolls across the surface of the ocean. Akagi shudders. For a second, she seems to resist her bow, lifting slightly as if straining against gravity. Then water rushes across her deck in a widening sheet. The great ship settles lower. Smoke pours from shattered openings, steel groans in long, echoing tones. Finally, she slips beneath the waves. You can feel the weight of the moment even at a distance. This is not merely the loss of a vessel. It is the erasure of a symbol that had defined the confidence of an empire. Farther to the north, the remains of Japanese aircraft carrier Kaga and Japanese aircraft carrier Soryu drift in silent ruin. Their fires burn through the night until nothing remained but twisted frameworks and floating wreckage. Demolition charges detonate in sequence. Columns of water rise, then subside. Each disappearance feels final. On the last surviving wreck, Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi has remained until the end. Reports of his decision spread quietly through the fleet as dawn brightens. Some sailors bow their heads when they hear the news. Others stare at the empty sea where the carrier had burned hours earlier. There is no ceremony, only absence. At 6 a.m., surviving ships receive orders to withdraw westward. Engines increase speed. Formation patterns shift into loose defensive lines. Fuel calculations dominate every conversation on the bridge. The battle is over, but the ocean still holds danger. American submarines may be nearby. Aircraft could return at any moment. You can hear the difference in tone across the radio circuits. Voices that once carried certainty now speak with measured caution. Reports are precise. Questions are direct. No one assumes victory anymore. Lieutenant Nakamura moves slowly across the deck as the destroyer gathers speed. He pauses near the stern and looks back toward the fading horizon. Sunlight glints across the water, revealing only scattered debris where an entire strike force had maneuvered less than 24 hours earlier. He remembers the morning laughter, the belief that Midway would fall quickly, the quiet dismissal of dive bombing as an uncertain tactic. Now the consequences surround him. The loss of 4 fleet carriers is not only a tactical disaster, it is a fracture in momentum that cannot be repaired in weeks or months. Air crews with years of experience are gone. Aircraft factories far away on the home islands cannot replace them quickly. The balance of initiative in the Pacific has shifted to an enemy that survived long enough to strike with devastating precision. At 8:30 a.m., radio intelligence confirms that American carriers remain operational. Their aircraft continue search patterns across the ocean. Japanese ships increase speed again, attempting to outrun both pursuit and humiliation. You can sense the silent calculation taking place in every officer's mind. Future operations must be reconsidered. Strategies once regarded as unassailable will now be questioned. Confidence, once a shield against uncertainty, has become a memory tied to the wreckage sinking behind them. By midday, the fleet has moved far enough west that the smoke from the battlefield is no longer visible. The sea returns to its vast, indifferent stillness. Seabirds circle above drifting planks and oil slicks left behind. Life aboard the surviving ships settles into a subdued rhythm. Meals are served, watches are assigned. Damage assessments are written in careful handwriting on damp paper. Yet beneath routine, an understanding persists. The battle has not simply been lost. Something deeper has changed. Lieutenant Nakamura stands once more at the rail as the sun climbs high into a cloudless sky. He tries to imagine future engagements, new plans, new formations, but the images refuse to take shape. The certainty that once guided his expectations has vanished, with the carriers now resting on the ocean floor. Engines continue their steady vibration through the deck. The fleet moves onward because movement is the only option left. Behind them, the Pacific closes over the wreckage. Waves smooth the surface. Smoke disperses into the upper atmosphere. Only memory remains of the moment when precise dive bombing shattered an afternoon and altered the course of a war.